I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and Nick Hornby needs no introduction. We're just starting there. But Nick, I have a question for you. I was having a moment where I was thinking, oh no, he's gone just to movies and just to television and just to music. The Ben Folds 5 project was fun. It was great, but I'm really glad you're back. And I'm really glad you're back with Dickens and Prince, a particular kind of genius, because it feels like a very Nick Hornby book.
Funnily enough, I'd just come off a pretty terrible TV project.
Oh, no!
Ended up not going anywhere. And I tore into this book as a, not knowing whether it would ever be published or whether I'd finished it as a way of reclaiming my freedom from producers.
I'm very happy to hear that. And this book that you refer to is called Dickens and Prince, a particular kind of genius. And I have to say, as I was reading it, I kept screaming, this is the perfect Nick Hornby book. This is the perfect Nick Hornby book, because it brings together all of the things you love. It's music, it's books, it's fandom, and creativity. So I'm glad you claimed your life back from the producers, but seriously, when did this book start? Because it is very you, but it's also a little unexpected.
Most authors have a fear that by the time they've finished their book, someone will have written something the same. And I thought, no one's writing a book about Dickens and Prince at the moment. I'm going to have this field to myself. It really did start with the reissued Sign of the Times box set, which has 60 or 70 tracks extra on it. And as I think I said in the book, that's more than the Eagles released in the 1970s. And this was just a bit of extra from Prince that he was recording around the time. And when I was reading about it, it was explained to me that he was actually making 2 or 3 records at the same time. So, the song If I Was Your Girlfriend, which he sings, his speeded up voice, that he was making a whole album with that character, and then a whole album as something else. And then it eventually got squished into one album. But I thought, who does that? Who works on 3 records at the same time? And then I thought, oh, Dickens did that. Dickens wrote 2 books at the same time. More than once. And I just started thinking about them and thinking, oh, it's weird they died around the same age, and the coincidences kept piling up.
Well, and also, I mean, there was a little bit of piracy, people lifting...
Well, the business issues, yeah.
Fighting with publishers and record execs and all of this kind of thing. So, I mean, on the surface, it makes sense when you look at sort of these little bits. But when you really dig in, I mean, both had difficult childhoods, both decided that, their art was going to essentially be the thing that saved them.
Yeah, and that's all they would do with their lives, pretty much. Prince just worked all the time. He recorded all the time. I think we can have a new Prince album every 6 months for the next 40 or 50 years, given what's put away now. And he played shows after he'd finished playing shows, and then he went to sleep for a few hours, then he got up and he recorded. And Dickens just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and he wrote these letters. There are 12 volumes of letters, which you or I might think was a pretty good lifetime's work. And he walked and he thought, and he walked all through the night. He edited magazines. He got involved in social justice campaigns. They were both the hardest working men in show business, as they said about James Brown.
I don't want to talk about this book in terms of biography per se. I mean, yes, obviously there are biographical details that pop up, but I mean, you're using this, and it's very tiny. This is 159 pages. This is a
very digestible, we'll call it.
It is, and it's fun. I mean, I know I sound giddy talking about this book, but I really am, because it's one of these weird little books where you're like, yeah, this is why I'm a bookseller. Because why wouldn't you just sit down and think, well, I'm excited about both of these things. And it's not necessarily about all of the details. I mean, at one point you're riffing on why perfectionism is kind of terrible, and that neither of them were perfectionists. They were just like, we're just doing the work. And I'm laughing because there are times when you're writing copy and doing things as a bookseller where you're like, I just have to barf out the thing and get there, and then we'll go to the next piece and it'll be fine. Yeah. And, we're talking about tiny pieces of copy, but at the same time, when you take your stuff seriously, you don't want it to be terrible.
You don't want it to be terrible, but I think these are people who are so overwhelmed by their own ideas that they didn't have the time as it were, to spend 3 years making a 12-track record or 5 years writing a 300-page book. They just wanted to get it out there and get on. And what I think is interesting about it is that they are both immortal. Their work lives on. And nobody ever says, oh, I wish they'd spent a bit more time cleaning up Purple Rain or David Copperfield. It's not like that. And I think it's a triumph for the people who just have so much to say that they need to move on.
So part of the fun of this book, too, is this idea where you start to ask, well, was it the practice? Was it the doing of the work? Or was it the fact that they consumed a lot of art and theater and popular music? And I mean, obviously with Dickens, there wasn't a movie piece. That comes later. But I want to talk about that for a second, because I think that's a really fun idea. I mean, there are people who make this stuff look very easy.
Those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those people.
They make it look easy, yeah. I was interested, because of the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 Hours and so on, that Dickens' career was so meteoric, and he'd barely written a thing apart from real jobbing journalism before he published his first book, before the Pickwick Papers came out. And I thought, well, where is the practice here? He just started writing these sketches. Well, there was a book of sketches, then the Pickwick Papers. And, he was in his early 20s. He really hadn't had time, not only because he was earning money, but because he was doing this other work. He really hadn't had time to shape his craft, his fiction craft. And yet he did consume an extraordinary amount. He used to go to the theatre whenever he could. He used to learn pieces by heart. He cared so much about how things were constructed, how they were delivered, and he studied them. I mean, of course, it's a consolation to us all who've spent too much time listening to music and reading books. You think, oh, great, I'm qualified to be one of the greatest writers of all time because I sure have read a lot. Of course, it's not like that either, but Prince messed around in the studio a lot. He had access to the studio through this guy. But again, he was probably too young to have done the rigorous practice that theory demands.
Okay, but you also note in the new book that you also have a little bit of you call it a not normal attachment to books and music and movies. You have to be a little obsessive to want to be in this world. There are easier ways to make a living. I mean, people know this.
I think that's right. And I can remember a couple of times in my life, but one was after seeing Springsteen for the first time when I was about 81, I think. He didn't come here for the Darkness on the Edge of Town tour. And then the first time was The River. He came 75, I didn't get it. And I had the best tickets I've ever had for anything. I mean, I just applied through the post in the way that you did in those days. And they were like magic tickets. I was with 6 friends. And every time we showed a ticket to an usher, they showed us further forward. And we were 3 rows from the front in the indoor Wembley. And in fact, the bouncers cut the crowd off behind us. So we could stand at the foot of the stage. Anyway, I saw this show and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what it done to me, how it made me feel. It was for those 3 hours. It was just extraordinary. And we'd gone in a minivan, I think, and on the way back, we were talking about the show. And then before we got all the way home, people had started to talk about other things, about, their jobs or whatever. And I thought, oh, you can't just have a normal conversation anymore. And I realized that I was apart from my friends in that way. Yep. We all loved the show, but I loved it more than everybody. And afterwards, I thought for the first time, whatever I do, I've got to get as close to that as I can. Not the noise or the music or being a rock star, but the creativity of it and the energy of it and the way that you affect people. And I knew that my life wouldn't be the same. And it's kind of always been like that. I spent 3 years in college going through old record shops, and I care too much about this stuff. And then, of course, if you're lucky enough to make a living at it, then it really takes over, because I don't write all the time. I consume all the time. I write sometimes, consume, write, consume. I think it is a different kind of a life.
I remember when High Fidelity came out and everyone in the world, we were all just like, who is this guy? How did he translate every dude every single one of us has ever known in our lives? I mean, everyone I know read High Fidelity very quickly, and just we were all yammering about it for forever and a day. But then we were sort of going back and parsing things and being like, oh, remember that kind of guy? I mean, especially when you work in bookstores, you've met all of these dudes.
Yeah.
You've met all of these dudes. Maybe there's still music heads working in a bookstore, but I still have the warm fuzzies about that book, and it's been a minute since that book came out. But I do think of you as one of those writers, though, that you're always sort of leading with your heart, and not all men do that when they write. And so the idea that you're digging in and getting really personal in a way, like really digging into your own Nick Hornby brain and saying, okay, here's what I think about. It's kind of fun. I mean, I knew Laurie Moore had been an influence for you. I knew Ann Tyler had been an influence for you. But I don't think Dickens gets enough credit for being funny. And certainly you are, no matter what you're writing, you're one of the funniest guys on the page. And I'm one of those people, though, who had Dickens maybe not taught to them in a great way in high school. And
well, I think that it's a disaster being taught Dickens before you're 18, probably. I think I said in the book that I had no idea that there were jokes in a thing called Bleak House. And there were a whole ton of jokes. And I had no idea there was so much energy either. But then you think back to it, and he was like, the way these part works sold when the early books, well, he stuck with it, but it was a chapter a month or whatever, and they were enormously popular with everyone. So in a way, it's not surprising to find that they were funny, because you think of the popular audience it had in the 19th century. They wanted it all, like we do. They wanted jokes, and they wanted to have their heartstrings tugged, and they wanted adventure. They wanted to be gripped. They are like TV series.
You talk about sort of the intersection of movies with both authors. And Purple Rain, I didn't see it in the theater, but I saw it later. And then I understood sort of, I was too young, honestly, I think, when it came out in the theater. And there was no way my parents were going to sign off on that. But seeing it later, I understand how the album connects with the vision, the creative vision for the whole piece. And Oliver Twist making sort of Dickens' reputation in a new way when that film happened in that moment, sort of in
the musical of Oliver came out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you talk about how the movies sort of made both of them as artists in a totally different way. And part of me is thinking, well, don't the movies do that for all of us, whether or not we're aficionados? I mean, you talk about back in the day, you would go see the Altman and the Scorseses as soon as they were released. And I mean, obviously Dickens died long before film was a thing, but you could argue that theater was the movies of their time. So he's deeply involved in that kind of creativity, but also both of men were wildly theatrical, just in their personal style and the way they approached the world and the way they approached their work.
The clothes thing, I could have written a chapter about clothes, but Dickens was a dandy. He liked to dress up. He liked to draw attention to himself. He was quite flamboyant. I don't think he was a very shy man. I mean, Prince, they say, was very shy, but some of those stage outfits don't look to me like the outward manifestation of someone who's crippled by shyness. Dickens was adapted a lot for the theatre. And quite often pirated. I mean, he was so popular that theatrical performances of his works went on before he'd finished the books. So they'd make up the ending because they hadn't read the whole thing. Yeah, the theatre was the movies then. What's different about Purple Rain is that, Prince had done pretty well up until Purple Rain, but he wasn't a megastar. And the idea that you could say to your management, as he did, I want to make a movie, I want to be the star of it, and you've got to fund it, you've got to find funding for it, seems extraordinary now. but they got it together and they did it. And then it became the biggest movie that year. And that endless loop of movie, music, movie, music, movie, music. So the album sold the movie, sold the album. That seems like kind of genius marketing. The thing with Dickens was that I think Oliver changed his reputation, that he became this much cuddlier, warmer, funnier person as a result of Oliver in the public imagination. The film version of Oliver Twist that came out after the war, I mean, it wasn't shown in America for a couple of years because of the anti-Semitic nature of the Fagin character, which nobody noticed. I mean, it had been done differently in the musical, and it just created this whole new Dickens. I think one that lives on, actually.
But this idea, too, not just of the theatricality, but that they're out in the world and they're touring live. This is also, I mean, Prince figures out pretty much before anyone else. Now it's kind of the constant, like, do you ever get off the road? By all reports, every live show, I never got to see him live, but everyone I know who's seen him live was just like, this, you need to go. You just need to experience and you need to be around this and you need to have it all happen. Here's Dickens doing, what did you say, 78 dates in 5 months? It was some crazy
His American book.
Yeah. And it's not like he was hopping on a plane. I mean, you've got to do goat carts and horses and stagecoaches. And
it was brutal. I think it was a brutal tour. Yeah. One of the things that Prince realized before everyone else was that albums didn't matter anymore. Whenever it was, 2008, that he gave away his new album in a newspaper.
Right.
And everyone said, this is crazy. You know, he's lost the plot. But at the same time, he was doing a 31-night residency in England's biggest indoor venue. And you think, well, that's crazy too. He's not going to sell that out because his career was at a bit of a slump at the time. And it worked brilliantly. Everyone I know in London that summer went to see Prince. They're like 500,000 people or something, more than that. The marketing was actually rather brilliant. And of course, everyone would do that now if they knew they could sell out that number of nights in a big theatre because they're not earning anything from recordings.
Which is, that's a whole nother conversation. That freaks me out that people are not getting paid for their work. But Harry Styles just did 15 nights at Madyson Square Garden. In 2022, 15 nights. And I get Harry Styles. I get it. But 15 nights at Madyson Square Garden, that is not a small space.
One of the things that's changed all this is the internet. It was a real lot of trouble to get tickets to shows when I was growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it was like postal orders. I don't know if you have postal orders in America.
We do. We do. Yeah.
Postal orders, stamped addressed envelopes, and not everyone saw these ads. You know, they were in the music papers, and now you can be browsing on the internet and you see something's on and you click and that's it. So the appetite for live music has really increased, and also the idea. I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, but the idea of buying people presents as well. You think, but everything's free. What's the point of spending money on them? But a live event, an unrepeatable thing, has a value that most things that we grew up consuming don't have anymore.
It's completely true. I actually just saw Joe Jackson in a very small venue in Los Angeles, probably 2,000 seats. It was just electric. And also I was delighted to see that my dude and I were not, in fact, the youngest people in the room because I was beginning to think that might be the case. And, you know, good for him. And years ago, I saw Leonard Cohen at a tiny venue at the University of Texas.
Oh, wow.
And 3,000 seats, same thing. There's been a lot of haphazard seeing of music for me, simply because someone says, do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I was much more of a concert person when I was younger. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I saw REM and, you know, folks like that. But now I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, I'll see what happens.
Yeah, you should go, man. During lockdown, I realized that was the thing that mattered to me most, that I missed.
Yeah.
Was live music. I didn't really miss sport very much, partly because I mean, I've come to realize this as I've got older anyway, but sport, if you care about it, has an enormous capacity to cause you pain.
Yes.
And, and at a time when we were all very upset about everything, and they brought football back behind closed doors, empty stadiums. And I thought, oh, I really can't be laid any lower than I am by the performance of my football team. Whereas music's just pure joy.
Well, and you have a fun line actually too in the book where you say, "No one can hear the words dearly beloved without thinking of the opening." And it's so true though. It is completely, there is no way. When I think about, so I have this one monster playlist that I just, I just throw everything on there. And it's about 18 hours long now.
Okay.
So When Doves Cry circulates quite a lot through. I want to go back to Dickens and how Dickens is taught, because I think it's not dissimilar on both sides of the Atlantic, where you've got kids whose brains are not fully cooked, and then you hand them a 500-page book and say, "Ha ha, figure it out."
Well, it's not that they're not just fully cooked, but they consume things in a different way. I mean, this is something that I think all educational bodies and writers have to grasp, is that people don't necessarily read a lot. They read in small bursts on screens if they do read. We just have to accept that things are changing. Technology always changes the medium. So, the reason that we think albums are such a great, the vinyl record is such a great format, is because you could get 5 songs on each side. And actually, when CDs, it was 70 minutes, they were always too long. It's very hard to find a perfect album that was made on CD because they were filling it up and they never had quite enough songs. So it lost that classic album status. And now, of course, albums can be any length,
Right.
because they don't often, or people don't listen to them in that form. And I think that, the same is true of books. That thing that I quote in the book about George Orwell being convinced that David Copperfield had been written by a child. I mean, those Victorian sentences, no child is going to think a kid wrote this. And they need a different kind of prose. They need it to be much more transparent. They'd be able to see right through the prose at the world that's being described. And yet somehow the canon of literature gets set and never gets added to. And if anyone tries to add anything to it, they say, "Oh, that's just being politically correct or right on." You think, you've got to be kidding me. That this is entirely random, that literature froze at this point. And Dickens should just be someone who's on your bookcase, and if someone recommends him, you think, "Oh, okay, I've got a copy of that. I'm going to get that out," but not because it's being rammed down you anyway.
So you sent me on a little bit of a rabbit hunt, down a rabbit hole, I should say, because you referenced an introduction that David Gates wrote for an edition of Great Expectations. And I remember reading Jernigan and thinking, who is this? Like, Jernigan was one of those novels, and I read it at exactly the right moment. And I was young enough to think, oh yeah, I get this guy. He's just, And I didn't know that Gates had a thing for Dickens until I read this introduction that you sent me chasing off for. But I mean, he's just one of the folks who has an affinity, and I'm sure there's a list as long as my arm. But can you think of some of the other folks who are not you and not David Gates, who are huge openly? I mean, Barbara Kingsolver has a novel coming this fall that's a retelling, I think, of David Copperfield with some other stuff happening.
Well, Peter Carey did
right.
Dickens-esque books. I think Vikram Seth and Rohinton Mystery maybe were very influenced by Dickens. He gets a lot of criticism from some snooty writers for being sentimental, which he can be at times. The number of characters he created could populate a small town. I mean, if you take all the books together, the minor characters, there are a couple of pages in David Copperfield where David, I think, is trying to sell his jacket because he's run out of money, and he goes in to see this like rag and bone guy, and this guy is kind of mad, eccentric, a bit dangerous. Dickens didn't need to do any of this. It's just like he could have gone in, got his few pence for the jacket and continued on his journey. But Dickens' sense of pleasure in writing this minor character in and giving him so much oomph, and the scene is so funny and so frightening and completely unnecessary. It's just there for the joy of entertainment. And that's why I went off on a bit of a rant in the book about paring things down and how every writing school tells you to remove all your redundant words. And I've always thought, but have you ever been in an airport and looked at the size of those books that people want to read? And they like long books. I shouldn't be saying that when I've just written the world's shortest book, but people like that kind of generosity of spirit, I think, and spend time with people. And the new J.K. Rowling's 1,000 pages, right? I bet there's something she could have taken out, but she didn't want to.
But I've heard you also say in other interviews that you start writing with really insanely tight drafts, and you realize that you've got to add in more.
Yeah, I underwrite, I think, and when I read it back, I think, oh, how's anyone supposed to understand why she did that when she was there the page before? And so it gets a bit longer with the second draft. I bore myself.
Nick. So here's the thing: the screenplays by nature, teleplays, screenplays, whatever you want to call them. I mean, you're leaving out all of the details, right? I mean, it's dialogue moving the story forward. That's essentially what, and occasionally a little bit of movement, but
yeah,
it's really stripped down, and it's an entirely different experience from writing, about a boy, which I remember the first time I saw you read in New York, and you were doing the little kid's voice because he was stuffy, and I'm watching you and you're doing, and I can't do the voice. I'm sorry, I can't do the funny voice. And I'm just laughing at you going, okay, he's in it. This guy we are getting the entire experience.
And the Dickensian experience.
Well, kind of, and then, but I'm watching the audience too, because that's half the fun when you're at an event is seeing how people are responding. You could see the response and you could hear the response, and it was just really fun. And here you are essentially making silly voices, but with a lot of heart and a lot of soul, because obviously the point was this kid.
Yeah.
And to see that kind of joy in the creation, I mean, certainly you do talk about some moments where Prince and Dickens are clearly ready to throw things against the wall because people are not taking stuff seriously. But why create if there isn't some joy to it?
Well, I completely agree with you. And I think it's another thing that we need to have a conversation about with books that we're trying to present to kids, because these are very, very troubling times, politically, ecologically, and yet dystopia seems to be something that we expect our children to think about and study. And you think, for all of us, music, books, all of this stuff is an escape.
Yes, it's nice to be dreamy and escapist and all of these things, but reading to me is an act of connection, and it's pulling into the world. There are folks that will tell you that reading, builds empathy, and sometimes that's true, I think, but it really ultimately is an act of connection, that you want to be part of something that isn't just right in front of your face.
When people say that reading builds empathy, I always say, have you ever met a book critic? Because all they do is read. Or come to that, an English professor.
And no, it's totally true. I mean, and there are times too where, I hear people saying, well, I made myself finish it. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why? If you hate it, just put it down, move on. You don't have to, I mean.
I could not agree with you more, because no one ever says that about an album or a TV program.
Right.
And so I hate reading being put in a different category, which is one of duty and no pleasure. And the moment you're saying you make yourself finish it, then it becomes separated from the rest of the arts. And I think that's wrong. It should be right in the middle, alongside movies and TV and music, and people should choose to do it. But while we say, yeah, I know this is a bit of a slog, but believe me, this person can write, that's no good.
No, and when I have people say to me too, well, just get past the first 100 pages, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
No, I'm a big believer in that first line has to swing.
Yeah.
That first line, and maybe a paragraph has to swing, but at least the first page. Like, you can't asking people when, and this is also, I'm going to get on my high horse for a second. Short stories. I love short stories. I love
Yeah.
short story collections. I love story. I love short stories. And if you're standing online waiting for something and you can read a short story in the amount of
Yeah.
time that you're scrolling through whatever social media platform
Yeah.
you're on, and I just, I've got people saying, well, they're hard to read. How are they hard to read? It's 10
There's
minutes.
such
You
a
can dip in
resistance
and
to
out.
them. Such
What
a
is it?
resistance to them. Yeah. Again, I think it's the idea that if I'm going to put my time into a book, then it better be bloody well worth it.
Yeah. For me, reading, even when I was in school and sort of being force fed things by people who were not excited to teach them, and that is not disrespecting to, there are teachers out there who are amazing. I just had an experience that, was not necessarily singular, but to have someone stand at the front of the room and say, well, I assigned you this because there are no cliff notes. Thank you for your honesty, but
Yeah.
I would actually like to be told why this fits into the larger context of my life in suburban Massachusetts and why you have me reading this. Instead of, I picked it because it's hard. And
I
it was a
once had
minor
a,
Faulkner.
yeah. I once had a letter from a young man. Basically, he said I had a choice at school between to write a paper about Pride and Prejudice or Fever Pitch. And as I like football, I've chosen Fever Pitch. He said, but there are no Cliff's notes. So he said, could you answer the following questions? Number one, what is this book about?
Okay, I will say as not a huge basketball is my game,
Right.
but I loved Fever Pitch because I loved your voice and your enthusiasm, and I just wanted to see the world through your sort of point
Well, I
of view.
think
I
it works
mean,
for sports generally. If you put yourself in the hands of someone who's going to let you down repeatedly, then you understand what the book's about.
but the idea that art can evolve. Prince, I remember sort of the wider suburban world that I was part of, like, people just didn't get him for a really long time. And the minute I got to college, there were people who got it immediately. And it's the contextual clues, it's the pushing the art forward. It's, if I had $1 for every 80-year-old who, when I was younger, was saying, oh, no, you have to read this Dickens. And I'm kind of going, have you read, and, fill in the
Yeah,
blank of whatever. I mean, because like every kid, I went through phases of reading stuff that was, whatever, got me to the other side.
yeah.
I mean, again, because I had the run of spaces that, now we have YA, which is a totally different thing. And you've actually written YA, which I
Mm,
didn't realize until I was
mm.
noodling around here. So when did you write the YA?
2006, 2007. Um, I think I think there are still plans for it to be a Broadway musical that might
Oh,
be
okay.
on next year. Tony Hawk, who the book is partly about, is producing it.
The skateboarder?
Yeah, yeah.
Wait, I'm
The book,
sorry. What?
yeah. In the book, this teenager, he reads Tony Hawk's book and it becomes a kind of Bible to
Oh,
him.
okay.
And,
Okay.
and so he uses phrases and sentences that can be applied to his own life. Not long before that, I didn't know who Tony Hawk was, but my American publisher sent me a poster of a
Yeah.
man standing on a skateboard holding High Fidelity. And it was him. He chose a book, a literacy campaign. And I said, why is this guy on a skateboard choosing my book? I said, that's Tony Hawk. So I got interested in him. Then I wrote this book, and then he read the book. And yeah, it was just a way of writing about younger people, really. It didn't matter to me whether it was YA or not.
There are so many distinctions that and hi, bookseller, guilty of this.
All those
Sorry,
divisions
I
behind
just, hi. But the idea that we have to label things where I'm just like, ultimately, whether it's music or theater or movies or books, it's all story. Right?
Yeah,
Even when we're reading the news, like, you need a narrative thread for a podcast episode. I mean, we can
absolutely.
tell ourselves that stories are like, cute little things that haha we use to entertain ourselves, but no, actually stories define us, stories help us find our identities in the world, like help us figure out what our taste is. I mean, story is the thing that makes us human. And
Well, and we spend a lot of time creating our own stories. I mean,
yeah,
if when you meet someone for the first time and you start talking, what you're delivering is a story that you've written and rewritten over the years. You think, well, where's the beginning of this? Where's the middle? What's the thing that's going to hook people in? And even if you're not conscious of that, you have edited your own life and turned it into something that might entertain someone else.
because it's much more fun that way. I want to talk about collaboration for a second because, I mean, Dickens not really known. He's the top of the screen
Yeah.
kind of thing. And Prince the same way. I mean, obviously Prince had collaborators as well, but my understanding is he could probably play any instrument he wanted to play and do whatever he needed to do. But it's a little different when you're putting a book out into the world now versus creating a television series or
Mm.
at least if it's a book, it's kind of, as you say, your editor and your editor's trying to make a better version of you. Which it's a very funny way to put the collaborative process. I'm wondering how much of that is sort of a response to doing the film work where, I mean, literally the first time you sit down with a script and you do the table read, that's the only time anyone's going to see things as you lay
I
them out.
know that's the biggest day for the writer, I
Mm.
think, where your play, as it were, is read as
Yeah,
a
yeah.
play, and it's in that order, and all the scenes are there. You know, I have to say also that table readings have been invaluable to me, and I think, oh, I've yes, I wrote this scene, but it doesn't work. It slows up
Mhm.
the action. It's got to go, and I really like that part of screenwriting and working with smart people, because no matter what book people say, a lot of producers, directors, actors are super smart. And I want to listen to what they have to say about something and amend my work accordingly. And there are lots of reasons that things change that are not artistic. I don't think that's such a bad thing either. People joke about test screenings and saying
Right,
that
right.
they actually change films as a result of test screenings. Well, I think if there was an equivalent in books, people would jump on it. If you could if you could read a whole book and get an audience to listen to it, and you could see that they were nodding off 2/3 of the way through, you'd do something about it. It's an invaluable tool. I mean, movies are kind of going a bit wrong at the moment because of Marvel and so on. Yeah, the best movies were a product of collaboration and minds, more than one mind.
And I have to say too, I mean, when we did that screening of Juliet naked, and that was what, 17, 18?
Yeah,
What a great movie. It's like they caught the soul of what you do.
such a lovely movie.
It's wonderful. And I was so
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised. And I may have accidentally gotten a little teary at the end, which when you're a Bostonian, you're not supposed to admit that. But guess what? No, I just remember being really super charmed because, when you know the book, and I'm one of those people where I'm like, listen, sometimes the movie is better. I didn't know what to expect. And so to be able to sit there in that very small room, and of course, it was just a bunch of us, and
Mm,
but it was so lovely. It was so great. And
mm.
everyone just got it and they showed up and they did the thing and made more art. And it's the evolution of art that I'm really interested in. Whether it's music or movie, I mean, can we just use art as an umbrella term for
Yeah,
all of the
sure.
fun things that
Yeah,
are
yeah.
exciting? I mean, I
And
love
that's the
that
other
kind of
thing that
book.
I love about collaboration is it takes me out of my world and into someone else's world. And up until the movies, most people I met in the arts were writers. I didn't know anyone, then I knew writers, and now I know directors and actors and soundtrack composers. And that enriches me to know what actors think of something, what they need from something, what a director can do with something. I mean, there's a very commercial imperative in cinema, which comes up again and again, which is give us something that enables us to cast up. And that means that you've got the two lead characters, but if you can give minor characters a lot to do or something memorable, you're more likely to attract a good actor. And and then we've got more chance of getting funded. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think, oh, this is vulgar, and then you start thinking about it. You think, oh, they just mean write a better part, and then that means write a better minor character. And how can that not be helpful to you? When we did an education, we got all sorts of people in smaller roles, like, Emma Thompson played the headmistress, and she loved that part. It was 2 days of her life, and she wanted to be a part of the film. But if the part had been flatter, we wouldn't have got that, and we would have got someone less memorable. Those scenes would have been less memorable. And when I transfer that to books, it just means make sure everybody has good lines. Not because I'm thinking about the movie adaptation, but because that makes the book better.
I know what a Nick Hornby novel sounds like in my head. I know when I sit down, I know, and I'll follow you. I don't need flap copy to say. I mean, honestly, I saw this title on a spreadsheet and I was like, yep, we'll do that. Of course. If I'm going back to Dickens because you made me want to read Dickens again. Yeah. I have Great Expectations, which, if I'm remembering correctly, Marlon James loves Great Expectations. So there's one point, and obviously, we've got Gates doing Great Expectations. So a couple points plus you. Great Expectations, Copperfield, Bleak House, and Tale of Two Cities. So let's put them in order because people like these things. Where do I start?
Okay, well, I think for me, David Copperfield and Great Expectations, there's not much in it. I think possibly David Copperfield for me, because when I first read it, which was in the 21st century, it was not familiar to me. And I think it's hard to avoid Great Expectations in terms of TV and film adaptations. So you might know a little bit too much about it already. David Copperfield, I didn't know much about, and it's his most autobiographical novel, and it's pure joy. Tale of Two Cities he only wrote 2 historical novels, as it were. That's one, and Barnaby Rudge is another. It's a great adventure. Bleak House is one of the longest, so I'd maybe see if you love Copperfield before you turn to Bleak House. One thing I would say is don't read Hard Times just because it's the shortest. It's got none of the things that make Dickens great in it. It's unremittingly bleak. I was talking to someone the other day about Edith Wharton and how every kid is made to read Ethan Frome.
Which is the worst one to read.
Yeah, sure, you can read it in a day, but it's got nothing of Edith Wharton in it.
You want to talk about Steinbeck for a second? East of Eden, by far. East of Eden, hands down. The only Steinbeck you really need is East of Eden. That is the quintessential American novel. It's the quintessential California novel. It is. I love that book. The Pearl? Really? The Red Pony? I mean, they're smaller Steinbecks that never get taught. Yeah. And Wayward Bus is a story collection, too. And it's just there's so much. I have this little pocket on one of my shelves at home that's just weird Steinbeck that no one else knows. It's me and the estate.
That idea that kids have got to read this author, therefore we will give them the smallest scrap so that they can say they've read it. I would much rather they read Harry Potter than a very bad Steinbeck.
There's a discipline to reading, and I don't mean that to sound weird, but it is a practice. You just, you grab 15 minutes here, I happen to be very lucky and I can read very quickly, and I can read a lot of text very quickly and retain all of it, which is not something that everyone can do, but I know that's something I've learned over time. And it's not something I just woke up being able to do at the age of 6.
But I do think we have the great advantage of not being born in the Apple era, because I literally had nothing else to do. And, I was glad to have read all those things, but if there had been something else to do, I probably would have done something else.
I just want to hear a story. And I probably, would have gravitated towards whatever screen was handy, although my parents were big on we don't watch television in this house, so that may also explain my terrible taste in certain things, because I'm just it's all novel to me. Even at my advanced age. It's terrible.
You talked to me at a weird point in British history where, because of our dear Queen, we're being returned to the 1950s until next week. Anyway, there's nothing open and there's nothing on TV. The BBC cancels all its programmes. You think, this is entirely appropriate for someone who came to the throne in 1952 that we're now being taken back to 1952. It seems to me entirely politically driven this time. With Diana, something weird happened in the way that something weird happened when Elvis died. I've always wanted someone to write a book about the first 48 hours or 72 hours after Elvis died. How did that happen? How did a washed up Vegas singer who couldn't buy a hit when he died became this thing suddenly? And the same thing happened with Diana a bit. With the Queen, it seems very sort of right-wing newspaper, BBC driven, like telling us we're not allowed to have any fun.
It's a good thing you have a book handy. I mean, you've got books, we've got DVDs, we can stream things. Yeah. And again, that's for me, the point of art is to move us forward as people. Forward.
Yeah.
And I want the language to change.
Make connections that we haven't made before, and
Right? I mean, that's the fun of it. I mean, there are some people who, when I meet them at first, they're like, you're a bookseller? So you like to read a lot. And I'm like, well, actually, what I really like to do is talk a lot. I mean, straight up, because the whole point of reading is to make the world bigger and to be able to talk to people that you don't necessarily, I mean, I get so much pleasure from talking to writers. It's kind of ridiculous. And actually, I'm looking at this.
We could just swallow a pill that allowed us to have read the book and then just do all the talking.
Okay, there's that. Somebody's probably written that into a novel, but I'm looking at this Hua Shu over my shoulder. I just talked to him the other day in his episode. He was talking about making a mixtape for his launch event because he writes a lot of music criticism for The New Yorker. And he's literally making a tape on a cassette player.
Oh, wow.
The coolest. I was just laughing because he also did a lot of zines when he was in college and things like that. But the idea that you can make this physical thing and the amount of time that we spent making mixtape and like, is this friend worth a mixtape? Is this going to last long enough for me to invest all of that time and all of that thought and all of that energy?
I do think that you got better mixes as a result.
Oh, completely.
Because during the course of the 3 minutes that you have to listen to the song while you're putting it on tape, you start to hear a tone and you start to hear a theme. And whereas when I'm just dragging things from Spotify into a playlist, I know I've got good music, but I don't know, there isn't the same coherence.
I was doing research for a different show and I needed a piece of opera that I had not heard. And I needed Glenn Gould's Goldberg Variations, and now Spotify thinks I'm 1,000 years old. It's like, no, there's a point to this, I promise.
I think you should have done it on someone else's computer.
I actually like messing with the robots. I really enjoy it. I mean, robots are only as good as the people who program them, and I just kind of enjoy.
Well, I think the more you put in there and the more confused they get, the more likely you are to come across something from them that might mean something.
There's a little more serendipity, but also physically, I mean, just being able to walk through space, that I missed that serendipity quite a lot. And now it's harder to get lost because we all have, supercomputers in our pockets and we can find directions. And I don't always have the best sense of direction. Sometimes even when I know where I'm going somewhere, I convince myself that I have to turn left instead of right. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I did that again. Okay.
That's the joy of browsing, in fact. Is not knowing where you're going and wandering around and finding a book that you didn't know that you wanted or were interested in. And however much they try, they cannot recreate the act of browsing on the internet.
No, and I fall in love with ideas really quickly. I frequently buy books on top of things that get sent to me. And I have multiple books going at once. I'm never just reading one thing, but what's on your nightstand right now? What haven't you gotten to that you've picked up where you're thinking, oh, I need to do this? Because you were reading some giant books about Dickens. The Prince biographies are a little smaller, but the Dickens.
Yeah. Well, I'm halfway through the book about the Sacklers.
Oh, Empire of Pain is so good.
And because I just finished his Say Nothing, the book about Northern Ireland, which is one of the best non-fiction books I've ever read. And I'm mixing that up with Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
The Gabrielle Zevin. Oh, it's terrific. It's that book.
Those are the two that are on the go. I've just been sent 2 Greil Marcus books, which are coming out. As usual, I've got, too much.
But that's the thing. I mean, we all have too much going at any given point because we wouldn't do what we do if we didn't have too
No,
much
no,
going on.
one never cuts one's cloth exactly to the shape of one's life.
I mean, I was laughing because I was looking for. I have an interview next week, and I was like, "Is the galley at home or is it in the?" I mean, I found it, but I had a moment of, I'm not entirely sure where that went, and I'm looking in a giant pile. I'm like, okay, it's not here. Okay,
Well,
I think I know where
I
it
can
went.
remember saying in The Believer once that it doesn't matter if you buy too many books because books are a very cheap way of expressing who you are
Mm,
on the shelf. So you
yeah,
can't afford the art that you want. You can't get that Hopper, not the original anyway, but the sort of full complexity of who you are and what you're interested in, even if you haven't read the books. I like that being represented on a shelf.
I also frequently end up buying something a second time because I can't find my copy.
Honestly. And I got home
I,
in an office and it's always in
yeah,
another place. I think, oh, hell, I'll just buy another one.
and because it's easier, but also watching the evolution of a book's jacket,
Yeah,
or
that's cool.
because the copy
Yeah,
doesn't always change necessarily, but like,
yeah,
there's stuff that I can look at it and say, oh, I know when that was designed, and
yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's a new edition of that. But at the same time, I get nervous if I walk into someone's house and I don't see bookcases with books on them. I get itchy. I don't know what to do.
No, and I guess that's what it's going to be like maybe in 10 or 15 years. We've already got no music on
Right.
shelves. And that makes me nervous. And it's like,
Right.
how do I know who you are? If everyone owns all the music in the world, how do I know who you are?
Right. Right. And I mean, that's half the fun, though, is we get to sort of dig around and
Yeah.
be a little judgy.
I always want to buy or rent property that's got the good books and records on the shelves. That's like,
Oh,
I
I can see
forget
that.
that they're not going to be there when I move in. I just think it's a good vibe.
I did actually buy something recently because my original copy was printed on not great paper and it smells funny. I mean, and then I've also repurchased Middlemarch in a different edition because the edition I have is frankly just not attractive.
Yeah, well, good.
There's a reason I work in books. There's a reason. It's
And
just
also, you're going to spend a long time with Middlemarch. You want to look at something nice every day.
yes, I am, and I've had so many people who I really respect say, "No, no, you of all people, you need to read this." So, what's next? Are you going back? Are you going back to that world where you're writing 60-page
I'm,
things that turn into
I,
3 hours? Or are you
I'm
staying with us
afraid
for a minute?
so. Yeah.
Oh, fine.
I've got a couple of adaptations at the moment that I'm really enjoying, and um, I'm trying to resuscitate my relationship with Ben Folds for another medium.
Well, that will be fun because
Yeah,
honestly,
fun for
as
me.
long as you're creating, I'm happy. So
Okay.
do
Oh,
whatever
there's
you
a
need to do. Not that you need
bit
to
of
entertain me,
creating.
but
I
I
do.
think it's
I
kind of
do.
great. I think it's really kind of great that you have all of these different outlets and you can talk to people in different ways. I mean, we just have to keep moving forward. Nick,
Yeah.
we just have to keep moving
Yeah. Yeah.
forward,
Yeah.
whatever that takes.
Yeah. I don't think that there will be such a job as a novelist in 15, 20 years' time. It will be writer.
Right,
And that
right.
writer will have to learn to write in different mediums if they want to
Hmm.
sustain a career throughout their lives.
Well, there's always going to be a bookseller. That
Yeah.
much I can,
Yeah.
that I can tell you without
Absolutely.
any trepidation. There will always, 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 always be booksellers. Nick Hornby, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over. Dickens and Prince is out now, along with all of your back catalog, which everyone should go find right now.
Thank you so much.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Topoff. We're going to recommend a couple of wonderful books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Dickens and Prince by Nick Hornby. I'm Marc. I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm joined by a brand new book buddy, Jamie. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Marc. I'm Jamie, and I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble in Leawood, Kansas.
Fantastic. Glad to have you here. We've got a couple wonderful titles to talk about. So, Jamie, if you don't mind, I'll dive right in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I was thinking about the marriage of music and literature, and this title kept bubbling up to the top of my head. So I just couldn't ignore it anymore. And that is Bowie's Bookshelf by John O'Connell. So good. Love, love, love. This is a beautiful look at the titles that really shaped David Bowie's life and career. So in 2013, David Bowie drew up a list of 100 books that were very influential on his life. They may not have been his favorite books in the world, but they were certainly substantial in his formative years and in his career and his personal life. So this book is featuring each of those 100 titles, and they're accompanied by John O'Connell's essays, which are tender, very fascinating, very thoughtful looks at how these books influenced David Bowie in his work and in his life. You've got such a wide range of titles. David Bowie was a voracious reader, and you will see things like literary classics that you would expect, but then hefty, very dense Russian history textbooks, basically. So he was a curious man, all the better for it, because everything that he produced was true genius. So any title that would influence that genius has got to be fascinating for any reader. So if you are a voracious reader yourself, if you have a wonderful reader in your life, if you are a fan of music, really, if you just want a new fascinating story, please check out Bowie's Bookshelf by John O'Connell. Oh, so good.
It is excellent. It is a go-to for me too.
Love it.
Easy with Bowie fans. We're easy to please. Anything that David
truly
touched, we love.
Yes, slap his picture on it, we'll buy it.
Right.
So, Jamie, what do you have for us?
Okay. So I am a Nick Hornby fan. On top of David Bowie, I'm a Nick Hornby fan. I was born in the 80s, so I'm a Prince fan. Of course, I'm a Dickens fan. I'm working at the bookstore, so you have to be, right? That's a prerequisite. So I was very excited to jump into this book. And as I was thinking about what to recommend, my mind went to the, million and one different music and author biographies that are out there. We sell tons. They're all entertaining. But I felt like Nick Hornby was really trying to make this point about how prolific Prince and Dickens were and how unique that was to these two people whose work he really enjoyed. And I started thinking, who else could he have included on that list? Because surely there are others. Maybe that's not who he's a fan of, but he could have included him on his list, right? So when I thought about that, I'm like, okay, I can't believe I didn't think about this before, but Paul McCartney. We had the Barnes & Noble Book of the Year for 2021 was Paul McCartney's The Lyrics. And it is a gorgeous 2-volume set. I'm going to lift it up. It's very heavy. Very hefty. It's got Paul's face on the side here, which is nice because who doesn't want to look at Paul's face?
Right.
I know. It has a staggering number of songs in it. His body of work was also amazing. So 154 songs that are included in this 2-volume set. You've got the full lyrics of each song. You have his notes. You have never before seen photographs from his wife, Linda Eastman. Reproductions of his notebooks. There's other ephemera in there. It is a book you literally have to get your hands on in order to enjoy it. And it is one that customers are always so impressed when we show it to them and open it up. My husband bought me this book for Christmas last year. And I have, I know this is silly, I have pored over it a lot, many, many times. And when I hear a Paul McCartney song or Beatles song, I can now go and see what the story is behind it. What he was thinking, and get a little insight. Favorite.
Fantastic. Lyrics it was such a treasure. It remains a treasure. You could open to any page and just get this lovely slice of Mr. McCartney. It's a fantastic choice. I'm not shocked that you picked a wonderful book. You've got wonderful taste.
Oh, geez.
Oh, shucks. Oh, shucks. Well, that is all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us at Barnes & Noble. Pretty simple. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester.
And I'm Jamie. You can follow my home store at BN Leawood KS.
Thanks, everybody. Happy reading. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.